Hi guys, my name is Nick Smith, founder and creator of Part-Time Pilot, and I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you my story of how I became a private pilot and how I found out and realized what the most important thing a student pilot can do to be successful and achieve their dream of becoming a private pilot. And what that is to always be one step ahead mentally of the aircraft and always be prepared. That's another way to say it. And that's very vague. So the best way for me to explain that in details for your whole student pilot journey is to tell you my story, because I pretty much did what not to do. And so I think it'll be very valuable for you guys to hear my story and pretty much why I started Part-Time Pilot, because I found so many things that could change in the pilot training industry. And there was an opportunity for me to provide that for people. So let's get to it. So about 6 or 7 years ago, I decided I wanted to be a private pilot. Probably about 8 years ago, actually, but 6 to 7 years ago, I got started. I Googled how to become a private pilot. I found that I need to be in a ground school and I need to do flight training. So what I did is I started calling up some flight training facilities, asking around for prices. And I think a lot of you guys can relate with that, right? So I just found the cheapest one. They said they had a ground school too, and I could get started with a flight instructor right away. So I started doing ground school. I paid $700 for an in-person ground school. I had to drive, 30 to 45 minutes from my house in traffic after work to go to these ground school lessons 2 times a week. And then I started flight training about once a week with an instructor. Now my instructor was like 75 years old. There's nothing wrong with that. He's a great guy and everything. But when I told him that I was an aerospace engineer, I think and after my first flight, he saw that I had a good feel of the aircraft. I think he thought, well, I don't have to do much to teach this person. And I think I got a little short-handed with that. And I was soloing in under 10 hours. I think it was like 8 hours or something. He had me soloing. And I remember thinking in the back of my head, like, this seems a little soon. I don't know. Like, I was fine with it because I didn't want to pay a lot of money, but it seemed a little quick. And at the same time, like I said, I was doing ground training. I was going through those lessons. So I had paid $700 for ground training. I was driving an hour or 2 hours to commute to work. And then I was driving that time to the ground lessons. And I was paying for flight training 1 to 2 sessions per week. And quickly, the money I'd saved up, about a few $1,000s, was gone. And now I was paying paycheck to paycheck. So now it was hard to fly multiple times a week. And I started to slow down a little bit on that. But I finished ground school, and that's when I actually got a new job in Southern California. This was up in Seattle, Washington. And so I decided to move in the middle of my flight training. But what I did before I moved is I called some places where I was moving, San Diego, California. I called some flight schools and I said, hey, look, I am started. I'm doing this. I have good momentum. I want to keep it going. What can you do to keep this going? Am I going to have to redo everything? All those types of questions. And each one of them, and I found it was basically the first one, I called the cheapest place, and they said, yeah, we're going to have you, right away. You'll just pick up where you left off and you'll go from there. But what happened is I had moving costs, unexpected moving costs. I had to get acclimated with my new job, get that paycheck going. The cost of living was higher in California, obviously. And so it took me a while to have a little bit of extra cash and kind of be ready mentally to start that up again. So it took me maybe about a month to start that up again. And when I came in, even though they said I would just get right back to it, the instructor they had selected for me wanted to see me start from scratch. So basically I had to start all over again. Now, I remember I told you that I thought I had progressed pretty quickly. So in the back of my mind, I was like, this is going to be more expensive, but you know what? This might be safer. This might be better for me in the long run. So I decided to do it. So I get back through my 10 hours with this instructor, and then now I'm paying paycheck to paycheck again. So I'm only able to fly like once a week or so. And then my instructor goes and gets a commercial job. So I have a new instructor. This next instructor, again, kind of has me redo some lessons, which is kind of annoying. It's starting to get kind of annoying at this point. But I'm not a confrontational guy, so I kind of just took it and continued on with my training. And this instructor I didn't pick this instructor. I just kind of, again, I'm not a confrontational guy. I need to speak up more sometimes. And I should have said, this instructor's not working out, because this guy, all he did was just yell at me, and it made flying, which was fun before that, start to be really stressful. And again, I'm paying paycheck to paycheck, and now I've redone a bunch of lessons, and I'm starting to think, okay, I've spent thousands of dollars that I probably shouldn't have already, maybe $2,000-$3,000. And then that's when this instructor got a commercial job. And it was kind of a blessing, because this last instructor, I think the flight training facility, they said, let's give this guy the best instructor, because they could see that I was starting to get frustrated. So they hand me off to this last instructor, and he was awesome. He really was. And that's right when about the summer in San Diego hit, and I was having to do my solo cross-country flights. And the solo cross-country flights here, they have you go to the desert. So that you fly to like Yuma, Palm Springs, stuff like that. And in the summer, it gets really hot. And the temperature limits on these airplanes are like 110 degrees or so. But there's also a marine layer in San Diego. It hits 110 degrees in the desert by like 11 a.m. or even sooner, 10 a.m. But the marine layer in San Diego doesn't clear until about 9, 10 a.m. So it was really hard to find a day to get my cross-country flights where I could take off without the marine layer, land in Yuma in the desert under the 110 degree temperature limit, and then come back and land. So my solo cross-country flights ended up taking me about 6 months to complete. I tried all summer, and the whole time I'm paying paycheck to paycheck, so I can just afford about one flight per week. And because I'm doing my solo cross countries, I have to stay solo current. So when I was going weeks without being able to fly that solo cross country, I would have to fly in the pattern solo to keep my currency. And if this didn't happen because of money or other things that were happening in my life, there was a couple times where I had to take a couple weeks off, and I really started getting discouraged. Then I had to start flying with my instructor again to build that currency, that solo currency, and get signed off on that solo currency. And this flight school also had me do these knowledge tests, so I would have to pay and review them with my instructor before I soloed. So then I had to pay my flight instructor over and over again for ground training and reviewing these tests. So during that time, I wanted to quit so many times. I was just paying and not making any progress. Again, for 6 months, I was doing this. But luckily, thanks to my wife, thanks to supportive people around me, I kept going. And finally, after about $22,000, I was able to get my solos done and prepare for my check ride, and then pass my check ride on the first try. And when it was all said and done, the joy of flying was completely gone, and it was just this big ball of stress. So I had built up a lot of credit card debt, so now it wasn't like I could just go out and fly for fun, because again, that's also expensive. Plus, flying just had this very stressful vibe to it now. And so I was like, what is even the point of all this? Did I just waste $22,000? How can I make my private pilot's license worth it? And I started to think, I have all this knowledge. I'm an aerospace engineer. I am now a private pilot. And I've gone through all these experiences that people would probably want to know about. In this day and age with all these influencers and stuff, I decided to make an Instagram and start sharing my experience and sharing the what not to do. So let's kind of review that in my story of what not to do. The first thing I did wrong was I did ground training, my ground school, at the same time as my flight training. Because I had a long commute at work, and because I was paying paycheck to paycheck, doing ground training and flight training put a lot of time, stress on my time and money. So that was mistake number one, and this is what I started telling student pilots. Do your ground training first, and then immediately start your flight training. It's going to be much easier for the time, the money, stress, all that, and then you're also going to be more prepared when you start your flight lessons. So that's what happened to me, right? Remember when I told you that I was getting through, and my instructor had me soloing because he said, oh, I'm an aerospace engineer, and look, I have pretty good feel on my takeoffs and turns and landings and stuff like that when I was just starting. But I felt a little unprepared, and it was true because I hadn't gotten through the ground training yet. And when I moved to California and they kind of wanted me to see where I was at, and they saw that I had soloed, and they saw that when they had me do these more complex lessons and I was rusty and I was behind the aircraft mentally, I started making mistakes. That's when they decided I needed to start all the way over. So that cost me right there, because I hadn't done the ground training first and I got too far ahead of myself. I wanted to get it done so quickly. That cost me thousands of dollars, because when I switched, they realized that and they made me go back. And I think that would have happened regardless, even with my first instructor who was like 70-something years old. I think eventually it would have caught up with me. And if he didn't notice it, I would have made a mistake. I would have busted Class Bravo airspace. I would have gotten in an accident, or I would have eventually failed my check ride multiple times. The second mistake I made was I decided to move from one state to another, make a big move, change jobs, all that, right in the middle of my flight training. So that's why I tell students, don't plan a move, don't plan a large vacation, try not to get sick. I know you can't really handle that, but these things that will cause gaps in your training, again, what did I have to do after that? I had to start all the way over again, thousands of dollars that I had to redo because I didn't plan ahead. I wasn't prepared. I didn't plan ahead. And the other thing I did is I didn't save enough money beforehand. I quickly got through my $3,000-$4,000 that I had saved up, and I was paying paycheck to paycheck, but now I was in a new state with higher cost of living, had moving costs, all these different things that I didn't anticipate because of the move, that now it made paying paycheck to paycheck even harder. And that's when I started to accrue that credit card debt, and it just made things a lot more stressful. If I would have planned ahead a little bit better, I could have avoided that stress. And the next mistake I made was I didn't vet my flight schools. I didn't do research ahead of time. I didn't vet my flight school or my flight instructor. My first instructor after I moved, remember, went on to be a commercial pilot. And if I would have sort of vetted that out, seen what their aspirations were, understood that if it's a younger pilot, they're usually going to have those aspirations to move on. Maybe I should have asked if I could have had the older instructor that has retired from being a pilot and is just now instructing people or instructing full time. I would have been able to choose that ahead of time. And then again, I didn't speak up when the next instructor was this young guy who, again, same aspirations. And even when he made my flight training miserable, I still didn't speak up. I just got lucky that he moved on eventually, and then they finally realized that I needed that best instructor that was going to stick around for the long haul with me. So that was the next mistake I made. And then also not vetting the flight school. I just picked the cheapest hourly rate, but what I didn't realize is they only had a couple airplanes. And so they had a lot of students because of the cheap hourly rate. But when things happened, like with my cross-country planning, or with my cross-country solos, when I had to cancel a cross-country solo because of, again, that marine layer and the temperatures, I would try to book another one that week, but the schedule would be all booked up. So again, I didn't plan ahead. I didn't double book. I didn't book a backup. And I didn't think that there might be more things than just the cheapest rate. I didn't realize that could actually end up costing me when I have gaps in my training. That maybe it's a little bit better to pay $10 more an hour for a rental if it means you can always schedule an aircraft. And then there's a couple more mistakes I made that I didn't really mention, but after I finished ground school in Seattle, I didn't take my FAA written exam. It was so dumb. I should have done it right when that material was fresh. But I waited until I was close to my check ride. And then my instructor, and I didn't know what was required of me. I didn't know, that I had to take that first to be able to take my check ride. And so my instructor, when we're getting close to my check ride, he said, well, you have to take the written first. And so I was studying for the check ride. So that kind of helps. The check ride oral, that kind of helped. The material was kind of fresh, but I had to re-study all that material and do those practice tests all over again for the FAA written. Stuff I already did. If I would have just taken that right after ground school when that material was fresh, it's just so silly. I just didn't, again, plan ahead. I wasn't mentally one step ahead of the aircraft, the proverbial aircraft in this example. And then the last thing I did is I didn't prepare for my lessons until the very end. I didn't start chair flying and prepping my lessons the night before until the very end when I started getting really frustrated, and I finally buckled down and said, look, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to put 100% into this and really buckle down and do this. And so I started chair flying my lessons the night before, exactly what I thought was going to happen. So mentally in my head, when I got to the lessons, I had already done it and made the lesson easier. And then I also got to the airport early and did all my pre-flight and everything before my instructor got there. Before, what I was doing is I was getting there maybe just 5 minutes early. So my instructor was just watching me pre-flight the aircraft, and I'm paying the instructor to just watch me. They call it paying the instructor to drink coffee. That was another thing I didn't realize till late. So all these things that I did wrong ended up costing me, honestly, $6,000 to $8,000 that I didn't need. So originally I had planned for spending $12,000 to $14,000, and that would have been right if I wouldn't have made all these mistakes. But no one told me all these things. No one told me not to do that. So that's why I started Part-Time Pilot, when I realized being prepared as a student pilot is the number one way you can be successful. And being unprepared is the number one way student pilots fail. 8 out of 10 student pilots never become private pilots, and it's because they don't prepare. And so I looked out there and I looked for flight training and ground schools that prepared their students with these knowledge. And there was bits and pieces out there, but no real training facility stuck with the student from the very start, said, this is how you get signed up. This is how you make an IACRA. This is how you do your medical exam. This is how you look for flight training. This is how you ask the right questions and find the right flight instructor. This is how you prepare financially. This is how you look for scholarships. All these things, and then teaches you the ground content and has you take the private pilot written exam right before you start your flight training. Get that out of the way. Just have that plan and that flow all put together in one place that can guide you, be your complete private pilot mentor. There wasn't a place like that. So that's what I wanted Part-Time Pilot to be. And I wanted to teach students, educate students about how to be prepared, how to plan ahead so that they can have the best chance at success. So that's my story. Please don't do what I did. Please go through our free content, go through our 5-day challenge to become a student pilot and get prepared for your medical exam, get started with your ground training, and then get our bonus course, How to Become a Private Pilot, which teaches you how to find the right flight school, what questions to ask, how to find the right flight instructors, what to avoid, and how tips to save time and money, as well as financial planning advice. And then finally, our ground school, which teaches you to understand the fundamental concepts and not just to pass the FAA written and memorize questions and answers, but actually prepare you for the real lessons and your check ride so that you're prepared for your flights. You're mentally one step ahead of the aircraft. So like Maverick says, if you think, you're dead. So we don't want that. We want to know that stuff like this. We want it to be second nature to us, so that flight training is easy to us, and we give ourselves the best chance at success, the best chance at achieving our dream of becoming a private pilot. Thanks for listening to my story. Please don't do what I did and listen to what I have to say about what to avoid so that you guys can be successful.